The United States Food and Drug Administration just approved a new COVID-19 vaccine for anyone aged 6 months and up through emergency use authorization, even though the state of emergency ended almost 2 years ago. On Thursday, August 22nd, the United States Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, approved a new COVID-19 vaccine under emergency use authorization, even though there's no emergency. And Biden himself ended the national emergency more than a year and a half ago in the spring of 2023. Nonetheless, the FDA has granted emergency use authorization for updated mRNA COVID-19 vaccines, a 2024-2025 formula from Moderna and Pfizer, featuring a monovalent component targeting the Omicron variant KP.2 strain. They say that this updated formula will more closely target currently circulating variants and provide better protection against serious consequences of COVID-19, including hospitalization and death. But the evidence supporting this is negligible at best, and researchers have repeatedly sounded the alarm the prevention of hospitalization or death wasn't the studied endpoint in the clinical trial outcomes. Instead, the endpoints were whether or not people who take the vaccines test positive for COVID-19 less often. And every other approval or authorization of updated formulations or new variant development is based on the safety and efficacy or lack thereof of the original injection's 6 months clinical trial data, which revealed that the COVID-19 injections actually caused more harm than good, with misrepresented data, misleading demographics, and procedural flaws. Frontline COVID Critical Care Alliance Senior Fellow Dr. Mary Talley Bowden explains how this approval was even possible.
Yesterday, the FDA approved yet another COVID shot, and we're now up to 10 shots to be fully vaccinated. They were approved for all ages, 6 months and older, and they passed through under EUA, or Emergency Use Authorization. The reason they're allowed to do this is because the PrEP Act is still in place, and the PrEP Act doesn't expire till the end of the year. So even though there is no emergency whatsoever, pharmaceutical companies are able to push this through in an expedited fashion without proper studies. These shots are all risk and no benefit, and they should have been pulled off the market a long time ago. And I urge people not to get any more of these shots.
When the panel said, listen, give it to 6-month-old babies with zero assurances this possibly would be safe. I said, where were you the day when the WHO came out and said, do not use remdesivir in the hospital? I'm Dr. Peter McCullough. Join me for an evening together. Tickets are on sale now.
In the FDA's path from research to emergency use authorization, they explicitly note that the manufacturer must submit an investigational new drug application. Without it, clinical trial in humans is not permitted to proceed. So these are clearly investigational new drugs, making the public receiving them part of the investigation. We used to call that experimental. Now, even though it was well known by the spring of 2022 that the more injected and boosted one was, the more likely they were to end up in hospital, the cover-up of that actually began in the summer of 2021 with so-called breakthrough infections, because somehow in the depths of skewed reality and compromised science, these breakthrough infections meant that the vaccines were working, of course. They worked so well in this graph by an anonymous X account, now notorious for accurate data compilations, that the vaccinated were still being hospitalized and dying in greater amounts than the unvaccinated, especially if you add all of the vaccinated categories together and then contrast it with the unvaccinated category. Might I add here that this is technically an inaccurate category, since data was based on the definition of being fully vaccinated, which only applied to those who received their final dose of the COVID-19 vaccine at least 14 days ago. So if you were hospitalized, died, or tested positive for COVID-19 within 2 weeks of your dose, you are marked as unvaccinated or partially vaccinated, which paints a skewed picture of the data from the onset. Yet the fact that provincial and territorial data across Canada were showing that the shots weren't stopping infection or preventing hospitalization or deaths remains true. The data from public health jurisdictions were painting a picture at the time that more doses equated to poorer outcomes, but these datasets and visualizations were swiftly removed when it didn't align with the safe and effective mantra. While the US FDA clings to the benefits of the novel injections purportedly outweighing the risk, I have repeatedly inquired with our federal health regulator, that's Health Canada, to ascertain that claim. My requests asking what exactly is the benefit and how they're calculating risk continually falls on deaf ears. So will Health Canada follow in the oh-so-to-be-expected FDA's footsteps? It would be unsurprising, although a troubling continued pattern of approving investigational drugs under the guise of emergency use, even as mounting evidence reveals that they're doing more harm than good. The continuous push for these injections, despite their dubious safety and efficacy claims, underscores a failure to uphold public health standards and instead prioritize profit over people. For Rebel News, I'm Tamara Ugolini. We've been calling on Federal Minister of Health Mark Holland to revoke market authorization for these novel injections at nomoreshots.ca. At that website, you can support this work, find out more, sign our petition, and also send a form email to Minister Holland calling on him to take the shots off the market. That's nomoreshots.ca.